Just how much of our physical Earth, specifically our most precious and life-giving resource, fresh water, is your seemingly weightless, invisible artificial intelligence actually drinking to survive? And what happens when the internet gets too hot to handle? This is Critical Path, where we explore stories and innovations about our global supply chain that connect our world to your everyday life. If you are a casual observer navigating the modern digital realm, you probably think the internet exists in a state of pristine, weightless grace. The very name that the technology industry chose for it, the cloud, conjures up this beautiful imagery of white, fluffy cumulonimbus formations drifting silently and harmlessly above the earthly concerns of friction, mass, and heat. The cloud is positioned as a magical, ethereal dimension where your awkward middle school photographs are saved, where global financial empires are managed, and where the collective, sprawling knowledge of human history is summoned with a mere keystroke. It represents, without a doubt, one of the most brilliant branding triumphs of the 21st century. It has successfully and completely divorced the concept of digital life from its relentlessly physical, industrial, and heavy machinery origins. However, the reality behind the glass of your smartphone screen is entirely grounded and, frankly, surprisingly sweaty. The cloud does not float in the stratosphere. It sits anchored to the earth in massive, windowless, brutalist warehouses scattered across industrial parks in the suburban sprawl of Northern Virginia, the arid deserts of Arizona, and the rainy plains of Ireland. Inside these heavily guarded fortresses of concrete and steel, endless rows of server racks hum with a deafening, industrial intensity. Every single bit of data transferred, every artificial intelligence prompt queried, and every highly detailed digital image generated of a dog wearing a top hat is powered by physical electrons moving at blistering speeds through physical silicon pathways. And wherever electrons move against resistance, they generate an inescapable, unyielding byproduct: heat. For decades, the standard operating procedure for dealing with this thermal exhaust was elegantly simple, if somewhat brutish. We just blew cold air at it. Traditional data centers functioned essentially as highly tuned, massive wind tunnels. Facility operators utilized giant computer room air conditioning units, pushing artificially chilled air through raised floor plenums, up through perforated tiles, and violently through the server racks. It was a loud, energy-intensive method, but it worked perfectly well back when an entire server rack consumed roughly the same amount of power as a few household kitchen toasters. Then came the artificial intelligence revolution, and everything hit the fan. With the explosive, paradigm-shifting ascent of generative artificial intelligence, large language models, and sophisticated neural networks, the computational demands placed on servers grew not incrementally, but exponentially. To train and run models containing hundreds of billions, or even trillions, of parameters, semiconductor manufacturers began cramming unprecedented amounts of processing power into single, microscopic silicon dies. The resulting thermal output fundamentally broke the long-standing mathematics of traditional air cooling. A high-density artificial intelligence server rack today does not resemble a toaster. It possesses the thermal aggression of a commercial pizza oven running at maximum capacity, completely trapped inside a phone booth. Thus, the digital age has collided violently with the unyielding laws of thermodynamics. The weightless, invisible cloud has been revealed to be incredibly hot, and to survive this infernal internal temperature, it has developed a deep, insatiable thirst. The global data center industry is currently undergoing a massive, frantic, and structurally profound paradigm shift from air cooling to liquid cooling. This transition involves highly specialized plumbing components, synthetic dielectric fluids that boil on command, and vast, often controversial quantities of the world's most precious and increasingly scarce resource, which is fresh water. To fully grasp why the most advanced technology companies on the planet are suddenly obsessed with advanced plumbing, we have to look at the uncompromising physics of heat extraction. Cooling is not the addition of cold, it is the systematic removal of heat. It is fundamentally a game of mass, density, and thermal capacity. The primary goal of any data center cooling system is to extract thermal energy away from the delicate silicon processes and relocate it outside the building. When viewed through the lens of thermodynamics, atmospheric air is a notoriously terrible medium for this task. It is practically a joke. Air is a gas with extremely low density and a miserably low specific heat capacity. To quantify this physical inadequacy, air possesses a thermal conductivity of roughly 0.026 watts per meter Kelvin and a specific heat capacity of about 1000 joules per kilogram Kelvin. In highly practical terms, this means that a volume of air can hold very little heat energy before it becomes hot itself. Transferring heat from a solid object into passing air is a slow, highly inefficient process. When data center rack power densities were low, hovering around the 5 to 10 kilowatts per rack range, the glaring inefficiency of air was perfectly manageable. Facility operators simply scaled up the brute force. They built larger computer room air handlers, implemented strict hot aisle and cold aisle containment systems to prevent the mixing of exhaust air, and spun the server fans at higher revolutions per minute to push massive, continuous volumes of chilled air through the electronic equipment. However, the laws of physics dictate a hard, insurmountable limit to this wind tunnel strategy. The consensus within the thermal engineering community is that air cooling gracefully taps out, entirely running out of physical efficacy, at exactly 41.3 kilowatts per rack. Beyond this specific threshold, a phenomenon known in the industry as the thermal wall is violently breached. To remove the heat generated by a modern 50 kilowatt to 100 kilowatt rack using air alone, a facility would need to pump an astonishing 15,700 cubic feet of air per minute directly through server intakes that measure only a few square inches. Attempting to force that sheer volume of air through such a tight, restricted space results in localized hurricane-force winds inside the data center aisles. The acoustic noise generated by this process becomes a literal nightmare. The ambient sound level in these high-density hot aisles reaches 85 to 95 decibels. That is comparable to standing next to a running jet engine. It severely impacts worker safety, poses occupational hazards, and requires technicians to wear heavy, specialized hearing protection for the entirety of their shifts. Furthermore, the electrical energy required to spin the fans at these absurd velocities creates a self-defeating, vicious cycle. The fundamental heat removal equation dictates that as density increases, the required airflow scales linearly, but the power required to drive those fans scales with the cube of the fan speed. Therefore, a mere 10% increase in airflow demands a massive 33% increase in fan power consumption. Eventually, the cooling fans themselves consume so much electricity, and ironically generate so much of their own mechanical heat, that the cooling system defeats its own purpose, dragging the data center's power usage effectiveness into highly inefficient territory. If someone attempts to rely on air to cool a rack operating above this physical limit, the consequences are swift and catastrophic. Real-world evidence confirms that when high-density cooling fails, the ambient temperature of a server room can spike from a comfortable 72 degrees Fahrenheit to over 90 degrees Fahrenheit in exactly 75 seconds. If left unchecked, the silicon processors will undergo severe thermal throttling, desperately slowing their own performance to avoid melting, before eventually suffering permanent, irreversible hardware degradation. The catalyst that pushed the global computing industry off this thermodynamic cliff was the rapid, aggressive evolution of the graphics processing unit, the undisputed engine of the modern artificial intelligence boom. While traditional central processing units are excellent at sequential tasks, graphics processing units are fundamentally designed for massive parallel processing, making them the perfect, indispensable hardware for the complex matrix multiplications and tensor operations required to train large language models. A brief historical look at NVIDIA's hardware progression vividly illustrates the terrifying upward trajectory of thermal design power over a single decade. In 2017, NVIDIA's flagship V100 chip, a powerhouse of its era, consumed a relatively manageable 300 watts of power. By 2020, the A100 architecture pushed that consumption to 400 watts. The release of the highly coveted H100 in 2022 spiked power consumption dramatically to 700 watts. Today, the newly released Blackwell architecture has utterly obliterated historical norms and design constraints. The B200 chip operates with a thermal design power of up to 1,200 watts. Looking slightly toward the horizon, the upcoming Vera Rubin architecture is projected to push those boundaries toward an eye-watering 1,800 to 3,600 watts per chip assembly by 2027. However, the problem compounds further, because these chips do not operate in isolation. To achieve the massive, coordinated throughput required for generative artificial intelligence, these chips are densely clustered together to minimize communication latency. When millions of dollars of hardware are calculating probabilities simultaneously, physical distance between chips translates directly to latency delays. Therefore, the architectural imperative is to pack as many chips as physically possible into the smallest possible space. This design philosophy culminates in systems like the NVIDIA GB200 NVL72. This exascale computing behemoth links 72 highly advanced Blackwell chips and 36 Grace processing units into a single, monolithic, rack-scale architecture connected via copper cabling. This single unified rack demands an astonishing 120 kilowatts to 132 kilowatts of power, representing a nearly 10 times increase over the rack densities of just a few years prior. Faced with a 132 kilowatt rack, traditional air cooling is not just inefficient, it is mathematically and physically impossible. To survive this era, the industry was forced to abandon the wind tunnel and fully embrace liquid. Understanding the severe thermal crisis currently gripping data centers leads directly to one of the most astonishing, counterintuitive, and closely guarded secrets of the modern digital age. Because water possesses a volumetric heat capacity 3,450 times greater than air, it is the undisputed champion of heat transfer. Consequently, data centers have quietly leveraged vast amounts of water for decades. Historically, this water was utilized primarily in massive external cooling towers to chill the air that was eventually blown across the servers, a process utilizing evaporative cooling principles to reject heat into the atmosphere. But just how much water does the cloud drink to power artificial intelligence? The empirical figures are nothing short of staggering. When a user casually logs onto an artificial intelligence platform to draft a routine office memo, generate a surreal piece of conceptual artwork, or ask for a recipe, the interaction feels entirely virtual, frictionless, and decoupled from the natural world. Yet, every single prompt entered into a large language model exacts a very real, highly physical toll on the natural environment, often hundreds or thousands of miles away. In a landmark, peer-reviewed study spearheaded by Dr. Xiaolei Ren, an associate professor of electrical and computer engineering at the University of California, Riverside, the secret water footprint of these models was meticulously quantified for the first time. The findings constitute a massive, unsettling shift in perspective regarding digital consumption. According to the rigorous methodology of the research, a standard conversational session with a model like GPT-3, comprising roughly 10 to 50 user queries, consumes the equivalent of a standard 500 milliliter plastic water bottle's worth of fresh water. Let that sink in for a moment. Every time an individual asks an artificial intelligence to perform a handful of tasks, a physical bottle of water is poured out, evaporated into steam, and permanently removed from a local watershed at a high-security facility. The hydrological footprint of more advanced tasks is even more pronounced. The generation of a single simple 100-word email using a highly complex model like OpenAI's GPT-4 is estimated to consume roughly 519 milliliters of water. That is slightly more than an entire bottle just for that one fleeting interaction. This is not recycled water, this is water evaporated for cooling purposes. Furthermore, the computational energy required to generate a single image using advanced image models like Stable Diffusion can match the power required to charge a modern smartphone to 24%. When scaled to the millions of daily active users worldwide, these individual sips of water aggregate into a virtual ocean. The initial training phase of these massive foundational models is particularly gluttonous. Training the GPT-3 language model, which features 175 billion parameters, in state-of-the-art United States data centers evaporated approximately 700,000 liters of clean, fresh water directly on site. This volume of water is enough to manufacture approximately 370 BMW vehicles or 320 Tesla electric cars. Looking ahead, the trajectory is terrifying. By 2027, the surging global demand for artificial intelligence is projected to account for a staggering 4.2 to 6.6 billion cubic meters of water withdrawal. To put that astronomical figure into perspective, this equates to the total annual water withdrawal of 4 to 6 entire nations the size of Denmark, or roughly half of the water withdrawal of the United Kingdom. Another recent study published by Dutch researcher Alex de Vries-Gouw indicates that related water use by 2025 could reach 765 billion liters, exceeding the entirety of global bottled water demand. This revelation utterly shatters the illusion of the weightless, invisible cloud. The digital economy is inextricably and physically tethered to the natural watershed. The seeming magic of artificial intelligence is quite literally fueled by the evaporation of the world's rivers, lakes, and underground aquifers. To truly understand the environmental impact, researchers categorize the thirst into 3 distinct scopes, each representing a different vector of ecological strain. Scope 1 represents the direct evaporation of water at the data center facility itself. To keep servers cool, massive cooling towers continuously spray water over heat exchangers. As the hot water returning from the server rooms meets the outside air, a portion of it flashes into steam, dissipating the heat into the atmosphere. This water is permanently consumed and lost from the immediate local environment. Crucially, because mineral buildup, scaling, and microbial blooms can rapidly destroy cooling tower plumbing, data centers often require perfectly clean, potable drinking water for this process. Scope 2 represents off-site energy generation. Data centers are voracious consumers of electricity, accounting for an estimated 176 terawatt-hours in the United States in 2023 alone. The vast majority of global electricity is generated by thermoelectric power plants, such as coal, natural gas, and nuclear facilities. These power plants boil immense amounts of water to create steam to spin turbines, and they use even more water to cool their own internal systems. Therefore, for every kilowatt-hour of electricity a data center draws from the national grid, an average of 4.52 liters of water is indirectly consumed at a distant power plant. Scope 3 is the supply chain and embodied water. This is the most obscured scope. It is the embodied water utilized during the manufacturing of the physical servers and the silicon chips themselves. Producing a single, highly complex microprocessor requires thousands of gallons of water. During fabrication, silicon wafers must be washed repeatedly at a submicroscopic level to prevent contamination. This Scope 3 requirement brings the narrative to the most highly specialized, paranoid, and fascinating supply chain in the entire digital world: the relentless, industrial pursuit of ultrapure water. While sprawling data centers consume vast amounts of potable municipal water for their massive cooling towers, the actual silicon chips that live inside those data centers demand something far more extreme before they even leave the fabrication plant. Semiconductor manufacturing requires water that has been purified to an almost unnatural, theoretical extreme, known in the industry as ultrapure water. Regular tap water, or even the highest quality bottled drinking water, is utterly toxic to a semiconductor. At the nanometer scale of modern chip architecture, where the microscopic transistors on a new Blackwell chip are arranged mere atoms apart, a single microscopic dust particle, a stray dissolved mineral ion, or a roaming bacterium acts like a catastrophic boulder crashing into the delicate gears of a Swiss watch. If standard municipal tap water were used to rinse a silicon wafer during lithography, the dissolved salts, calcium, and minerals would instantly short-circuit the chip's pathways, destroying millions of dollars of inventory in seconds. Consequently, the semiconductor industry requires water that is essentially nothing but perfectly balanced hydrogen and oxygen. Ultrapure water is relentlessly stripped of all organic matter, suspended solids, dissolved gases, and trace ions down to the parts per trillion level. It is purified to the theoretical maximum resistivity of 18.2 megohm centimeters at 25 degrees Celsius. Because water conducts electricity strictly through the impurities dissolved within it, water that measures 18.2 megohm centimeters is so completely devoid of conductive ions that it actively resists the flow of electricity. This water is so aggressively pure, so entirely stripped of its natural state, that it is no longer safe for human consumption. Stripped of all minerals, it acts as a hungry solvent. If a human were to drink it, the water would actively and dangerously leach essential electrolytes and minerals out of the human body. Creating this bizarre liquid is an extraordinarily inefficient, highly energy-intensive feat of chemical engineering. To yield just 1,000 gallons of ultrapure water, a semiconductor fabrication plant must input roughly 1,400 to 1,600 gallons of municipal tap water into its systems. Why is up to 600 gallons of precious water seemingly wasted and sent down the drain in this transaction? The answer lies in the brutal mechanical realities of the purification process, which consists of three grueling primary stages. First, pre-treatment. The raw municipal water passes through large multimedia filters and activated carbon beds. This strips out the large particulate matter, anything larger than 5 microns, along with chlorine and organic bulk. Massive water softeners are utilized to reduce the water's natural hardness to below 1 part per million, to protect the highly delicate membranes in the subsequent stages. Second is reverse osmosis. This is the heart of the purification system and the primary culprit for the massive volumetric water loss. High-pressure industrial pumps violently force the pre-treated water through semi-permeable membranes, featuring microscopic pores measuring approximately 0.0001 microns. These membranes successfully reject 95% to 99% of all dissolved solids. However, reverse osmosis systems cannot push 100% of the water through the membrane. If they did, the rejected salts and minerals would instantly crystallize and permanently clog or foul the delicate membrane. Therefore, a continuous high-volume cross-flow of reject water, often called brine or concentrate, must constantly wash over the surface of the membrane to carry the concentrated contaminants away to the drain. This unavoidable operational necessity accounts for the massive 500-plus gallon loss in the ratio. Finally, the water passes through polishing via electrodeionization and ultrafiltration. The water passes through a system that utilizes specialized ion exchange resins and electrical currents to continuously pull the final, stubborn trace ions out of the water. Powerful ultraviolet light is applied to sterilize any remaining organic molecules, breaking down their DNA, and submicron filters ensure no particles larger than 0.01 microns remain in the fluid. The average semiconductor fabrication plant utilizes between 2 and 4 million gallons of municipal water daily, just to feed this intensive process. That is an amount equivalent to the daily water use of a small city of 33,000 households. This is the invisible, upfront hydrological tax paid by the environment before an artificial intelligence chip even powers on for the first time. Once the delicate, ultra-pure water wash silicon is manufactured, shipped, and installed into the data center, the problem fiercely returns to heat extraction. With traditional air cooling thoroughly defeated by 132 kilowatt server racks, the technology industry has effectively turned to the plumber for salvation. To cool modern architecture, water must bypass the air entirely and be brought directly to the source of the fire. Direct-to-chip liquid cooling, also widely known as cold plate cooling, is currently the dominant transitional technology bridging the gap between legacy air environments and the liquid future. It operates on a principle highly familiar to any automotive mechanic or personal computer gaming enthusiast, but scaled up to an exacting, industrial extreme. Instead of relying on inefficient air to ferry heat away, these systems attach highly conductive metal heat sinks, typically fashioned from copper or aluminum, directly onto the surface of the hottest heat-generating components. These custom-machined cold plates are intricately carved with microscopic internal channels known as microfluidics. A specialized closed-loop system pumps a chilled liquid, often a formulated water and glycol mixture, or a synthetic dielectric fluid, through these tiny channels within the cold plate. Because liquid is 3,450 times more effective at absorbing heat volumetrically than air, the fluid instantly strips the thermal energy away from the silicon as it rapidly flows through the microchannels. The now heated liquid is pushed out of the server chassis and into a critical piece of infrastructure known as a coolant distribution unit. This unit is the beating, mechanical heart of the liquid cooling architecture. It houses heavy-duty redundant pumps, cross-connected filtration mechanisms to catch debris, and a highly efficient liquid-to-liquid plate heat exchanger. Inside this heat exchanger, the hot fluid from the delicate server loop passes its thermal energy to a secondary facility water loop, which then ferries the heat completely outside the building to a cooling tower or dry cooler. The engineering precision required for these systems is absolutely paramount. Transferring conductive liquids under pressure directly above millions of dollars of hypersensitive electronic equipment is inherently terrifying. A single minor leak could trigger a catastrophic short circuit, destroying the entire rack. To mitigate this extreme risk, the supply chain for data center cooling has heavily invested in the development of universal quick disconnects. Manufactured by specialized engineering firms like Parker Hannifin, Danfoss and Staubli, these disconnects are dry break, flat face valves. They are precision engineered to allow technicians to hot swap broken servers and disconnect liquid lines with absolute zero spillage or dripping, ensuring the safety of the surrounding electronics. Direct-to-chip systems are incredibly effective. A well-designed loop can capture and remove 70% to 80% of the total thermal load of a server rack right at the source. This massive reduction in cooling overhead enables facility power usage effectiveness ratios to drop from a stagnant, power-hungry industry average of 1.5 down to near-perfect scores of 1.1 or 1.2. However, there is a structural limitation. It is a targeted strike. It only cools the specific, flat components that the cold plates physically touch. The remaining 20% to 30% of the heat, generated by memory modules, optical network switches, and heavy power supplies, must still be managed by supplemental air cooling infrastructure. For organizations seeking the ultimate, uncompromising solution to extreme density, where the goal is zero air and maximum compute, partial liquid cooling is not enough. They must submerge the entire machine. For the absolute vanguard of high-density computing, where rack power limits push relentlessly toward 200 kilowatts and beyond, the ultimate architectural solution is immersion cooling. This method discards the targeted cold plates, the intricate internal tubing, and the noisy server fans entirely. Instead, the server motherboard is removed from its standard rack chassis and plunged horizontally into a specialized heavy-duty tank that is completely filled with a thermally conductive liquid. Watching an active immersion cooling tank in operation is a visually jarring, highly counterintuitive experience. Millions of dollars of active, fully powered electronic hardware sit completely submerged in what appears to be a bathtub of water. However, the fluid is definitively not water. It is a highly engineered, synthetic dielectric fluid. Dielectric fluids possess excellent thermal conductivity, allowing them to move heat, but they possess near-zero electrical conductivity. Because they do not conduct electricity, the live servers do not short-circuit, even when fully bathed in the liquid. Immersion cooling achieves an unprecedented 100% heat capture. There are no thermal gaps, no localized hotspots, and absolutely zero need for supplemental air conditioning or internal server fans. The complete elimination of server fans alone is a massive victory, instantly reducing a server's total power consumption by 15% to 20%. The immersion cooling landscape is fiercely divided into two distinct technological pathways, each with its own benefits and deep complexities: single-phase and two-phase. In single-phase immersion cooling, the defining characteristic is absolute thermal stability. The dielectric fluid utilized, typically a hydrocarbon-based synthetic oil, a highly refined mineral oil, or a biodegradable synthetic ester, remains in a liquid state throughout the entire operation. Crucially, the fluid never boils. As the submerged chips operate and generate intense heat, the surrounding fluid absorbs it evenly across all components. A pump then physically pulls the warm liquid out of the immersion tank, runs it through a facility heat exchanger to cool it down, and cycles the chilled liquid back into the bath. Because the liquid does not evaporate or build up vapor pressure, the tanks are essentially open baths fitted with simple, unsealed lids, operating calmly at standard atmospheric pressure. The mechanical simplicity of this setup makes it highly reliable, incredibly easy to maintain, and favored by operators planning for long-term, predictable deployments. Then we have two-phase immersion cooling. This represents the absolute technological pinnacle of thermal management, leveraging the awesome, raw power of phase change physics. In these complex systems, the tank is filled with a highly specialized, engineered fluorinated fluid that has been chemically designed to possess an exceptionally low boiling point, often engineered to boil between 34 degrees Celsius and 56 degrees Celsius. When the powerful artificial intelligence chips engage, their surface temperatures quickly exceed the fluid's low boiling point. The fluid in direct contact with the hot silicon instantly boils, transitioning violently from a liquid to a vapor. This phase change, capitalizing on the latent heat of vaporization, absorbs massive amounts of thermal energy far more rapidly and efficiently than any circulating liquid ever could. The resulting vapor bubbles violently rise to the surface of the tank. Because of this vapor generation, the tank must be completely sealed. At the top of the sealed tank lies a condenser coil, chilled by cold facility water. When the hot vapor hits the cold coil, it condenses back into a liquid state and rains back down into the bath, completing a continuous, self-regulating, passive cooling loop without the need for mechanical fluid pumps. Two-phase systems demonstrate incredible performance, capable of handling heat fluxes 10 times higher than air cooling limits, making them theoretically capable of cooling the most aggressive hardware humanity can invent. But of course there is a catch. Despite its thermodynamic brilliance, two-phase immersion cooling has recently collided with a massive, multi-billion-dollar roadblock that threatens the entire sub-industry. The entire technology relied almost exclusively on a specific family of fluorinated fluids to achieve the perfect low boiling points, most notably the 3M Novec line. These highly engineered fluids belong to a much broader class of chemicals known as PFAS, or per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances. Dubbed forever chemicals by environmentalists, these substances are notoriously persistent in the environment, failing to break down naturally, and have been increasingly linked to severe health risks in humans and wildlife. Facing rapidly mounting global regulatory pressure, looming bans in the European Union, and massive environmental lawsuits regarding water contamination, the 3M company made a shock announcement in December 2022. They would completely exit all forever chemical manufacturing, definitively discontinuing the entire Novec line by the end of 2025. This abrupt announcement triggered an earthquake throughout the data center supply chain. Major hyperscalers like Microsoft, who were heavily invested in testing two-phase systems, were forced to effectively halt their two-phase immersion research. The industry was left scrambling for viable replacements. Today, global chemical giants are racing fiercely to fill the void. Companies like Syensqo and Chemours are pushing new, supposedly safer fluorinated alternatives to keep two-phase cooling alive. Meanwhile, proponents of single-phase immersion have aggressively seized the market opportunity. They are heavily marketing their hydrocarbon and synthetic ester fluids as safe, biodegradable and entirely forever chemical-free, arguing that the environmental and regulatory risks of two-phase cooling are simply not worth the marginal performance gains. Whether a hyperscale data center employs intricate direct-to-chip microfluidics or plunges its servers into vats of synthetic oil, the ultimate, final heat sink for the vast majority of these massive facilities remains local facility water. The heat must go somewhere, and it usually goes into a cooling tower. Therefore, the digital thirst of artificial intelligence has profound, highly visible, real-world geopolitical consequences. Data centers are not built in a vacuum. They are massive industrial facilities, often constructed in geographic regions, already suffering from chronic water stress, lured by the promise of cheap land, tax incentives, and abundant renewable solar energy. The inherent tension between aggressive digital expansion and basic human survival is rapidly reaching a boiling point. In 2023, data centers operating in California alone consumed an estimated 50 billion liters of physical water. That is a volume equivalent to 20,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools. By 2028, researchers project that this consumption could surge to an alarming 116 billion liters annually. This is an existential concern in a state historically plagued by severe, multi-year megadroughts and agricultural water rationing. The phenomenon of the giant soda straw, a hyperscale data center drawing millions of gallons of water a day from local, stressed aquifers, is no longer going unnoticed by local municipalities and angry residents. Perhaps the most prominent and impactful example of this societal backlash occurred recently in Santiago, Chile. The technology giant Google had successfully secured permits in 2020 to build a massive, state-of-the-art $200 million data center complex. The facility was architecturally designed to utilize traditional, water-intensive cooling towers that would continuously draw an estimated 7.6 million liters of potable water a day directly from the Santiago Central Aquifer. Chile, however, is currently suffering through a brutal, unprecedented 15-year megadrought supercharged by climate change, with the government frequently forced to enforce strict water rationing upon its citizens. Outraged locals, environmental activists, and indigenous groups mounted a fierce, organized resistance against the project, arguing that digital storage should not take precedence over drinking water. In a landmark decision in February 2024, a Chilean environmental court sided with the citizens, partially reversing the project's authorization and forcing Google to completely halt development. The court mandated that the company account for the effects of climate change on the aquifer. Acknowledging the profound unsustainability of their original design in a drought-stricken region, Google retreated, announcing they would completely scrap the water-cooled architecture and redesign the facility from scratch to utilize a vastly different, air-cooled methodology, despite the massive energy efficiency penalties. This incident in South America is widely viewed as a harbinger of the immediate future. The previously invisible environmental toll of artificial intelligence is becoming highly visible and highly contested. Lawmakers globally, from Virginia to California, are beginning to draft stringent legislation requiring strict water usage disclosures for data centers during the permitting process. This marks the definitive end of the era where tech giants could quietly treat local watersheds as an infinite, unmetered resource. To survive this regulatory and societal pushback, the data center industry is increasingly looking toward water-positive pledges, investing heavily in closed-loop liquid cooling systems that recycle internal fluids without any evaporation, and utilizing reclaimed, treated gray wastewater instead of pristine potable drinking water. The rapid evolution of the digital realm is ultimately a story of massive, unintended physical consequences. Society collectively envisioned the cloud as a weightless, frictionless utopia of pure information, floating harmlessly above the physical world. But as we have seen today, the magic requires an incredibly aggressive, heavy industrial furnace to operate. The historical, physical limits of traditional air cooling have been fundamentally and violently shattered by the arrival of 1,200-watt processors and staggering 132-kilowatt server racks. To prevent the hardware from literally melting itself into slag, the industry has been forced to plunge headfirst into the liquid cooling revolution. This monumental transition has birthed incredibly sophisticated, highly specialized supply chains, from the wildly inefficient chemical alchemy required to manufacture 18.2 megohm ultrapure water, to the intricate microfluidic cold plates and the boiling, phase-changing dielectric vats of two-phase immersion. The underlying reality remains startlingly simple, completely counterintuitive, and profoundly vital for the future of resource management. The cloud is incredibly hot, and to survive, it is deeply, dangerously thirsty. Every single time a user types a prompt into a language model to draft a routine email, or casually asks an artificial intelligence to generate a landscape, no magic is involved. Instead, physical electricity surges through physical silicon, massive heat radiates outward, and miles away, in a windowless fortress of concrete and steel, a physical bottle of fresh water is evaporated into the sky to keep the machine alive. So I have to ask you, now that you know exactly what is happening behind the curtain, do you think the technological benefits of generative artificial intelligence outweigh the massive physical tax it places on our global watersheds? Or does the tech industry need a serious reality check before the well literally runs dry? Let us know what you think down in the comments. Thanks for listening and watching. Please like and subscribe, and make sure to check out our other videos about the global supply chain.